My name's Jake, and I used to think I had it all figured out. 35 years old, married to the most stunning woman I'd ever laid eyes on, Lydia. She's got that long, dark hair that falls like silk down her back, those green eyes that could stop traffic, and a body that turns heads wherever we go. We've been together 10 years, 2 kids, a cozy house in the suburbs of Chicago. I'm a mechanic, grease under my nails, working hard to keep us afloat. She's an executive assistant at some fancy downtown firm. High heels, tight skirts, the whole 9 yards. I always figured she dressed like that for the job, but damn, I loved coming home to her. That night, though, everything changed. It was a Tuesday, kids at my mom's for the night. I got off early, figured I'd surprise her with dinner. Walked in quiet, roses in hand, ready to see that smile that still gets me every time. But the house wasn't empty. I heard her voice drifting from the kitchen, low, sultry, not the way she talks to me. I froze by the doorway, the roses slipping a little in my grip. Yeah, it's been wild, she was saying, her voice dripping with something I hadn't heard in years. I started something with Richard, my boss. God, he's got this power, you know? The way he looks at me in those meetings, like he's undressing me with his eyes. It's different from Jake. He's safe. Richard, though, he takes what he wants. My stomach dropped like a stone. Richard, her boss, the guy she's mentioned in passing, tall, silver-haired, some hotshot who runs the company. I pictured him, suit pressed, leaning close to her at her desk, his hand brushing hers. My wife, my Lydia, talking about him like that. My blood boiled, but my feet wouldn't move. I stood there, listening as she giggled, her voice getting softer, more intimate. Last night, after the late meeting, we ended up in his office. The door locked, the blinds down. Let's just say I couldn't say no. I don't know how long I stood there. The roses hit the floor, petals scattering like my shattered pride. I wanted to barge in, scream, demand answers. But instead, I backed out, slipped into my truck, and peeled out of the driveway. My hands shook on the wheel, my mind racing with images I couldn't unsee. Her in his arms, her lips on his, her body pressed against that desk. I drove to the bar down the street, downed 2 whiskeys, and stared at my reflection in the grimy mirror. Who was that guy looking back? Not the man she married. Not anymore. The next morning, I played it cool. Kissed her goodbye like nothing happened, watched her strut out in that black skirt that hugs her curves, knowing damn well where she was headed. To him. I spent the day in the garage, wrench in hand, but my head was elsewhere. I needed proof. That night, when she showered, I grabbed her phone. No password, stupid mistake on her part. And there it was, text from Richard. Can't stop thinking about you in that red dress, he wrote. Tonight, my place. No interruptions. A photo of her in lingerie, sent just last week. My chest tightened, a mix of rage and something darker, jealousy, maybe, or the sting of being replaced. I confronted her that night. Kids were asleep, house silent. I threw the phone on the table, the screen glowing with their secrets. Explain this, I said, my voice low, barely holding it together. She froze, those green eyes wide with panic. At first, she denied it, said it was a joke, a misunderstanding. Then she broke, tears streaming down that perfect face. Jake, it's not what you think. I was lonely, and he made me feel wanted. But I love you. Wanted. The word cut deep. I stared at her, seeing not my wife but a stranger. You love me, I said, my voice cracking. Then why'd you let him touch you? Why'd you send him that photo? She sobbed, reaching for me, but I pulled back. Get out, I whispered. She didn't move at first, then grabbed her keys and fled, leaving me alone with the echo of her confession. But here's the twist, I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, scrolling through more messages. One caught my eye, a voice note from Richard. I played it, heart pounding. Lydia, baby, we're done hiding. I'm leaving my wife. Meet me tomorrow, we'll figure this out. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was planning a whole new life. And me? I was the fool she'd leave behind. The next day, I followed her. Saw her slip into his sleek black Mercedes, her hand on his thigh as they drove off. I tailed them to a hotel, watched her walk in with him, that red dress clinging to her like a second skin. I sat there, engine running, torn between breaking down the door and driving away forever. That's when my phone buzzed, a text from her. Jake, we need to talk. I'm sorry. Too late, I thought. The damage was done. But the real shock came later. That night, she came home, face pale, eyes red. Richard's wife knows, she whispered. She's threatening to ruin us both. I looked at her, this woman I'd loved, now tangled in a mess of her own making. And for the first time, I felt a cold smile creep across my face. Maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to turn the tables. I sat there in the kitchen, Lydia's words hanging in the air like smoke. Richard's wife knows. She's threatening to ruin us both. Her voice trembled, those green eyes darting around like a trapped animal. She stood in the doorway, still in that red dress that had haunted me since I saw her wear it for him. The fabric hugged her hips, the neckline dipping just enough to remind me of the photo she'd sent. Her body on display, a secret I wasn't meant to see. My chest burned, a mix of rage and something twisted, something that made me want to pull her close and push her away all at once. Ruin you, I said, leaning back in the chair, forcing my voice steady. You did that yourself, Lydia, parading around with your boss, letting him put his hands where mine used to go. Her lips parted, a gasp escaping, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped closer, her perfume hitting me, sweet, intoxicating, the same scent she wore when we'd make love on lazy Sundays. Now it felt like a weapon. Jake, please, she whispered, her hand reaching for mine. It was a mistake. He seduced me. Those late nights, the way he'd lean in, his voice low, telling me I'm beautiful. I got lost. But I'm here now. I want to fix this. Her fingers brushed my skin, and for a second, I felt that old spark, the heat of her touch, the memory of her body against mine. But then I saw him again, that silver-haired bastard, his lips on her neck, and the spark turned to ash. Fix it. I yanked my hand back, standing up so fast the chair scraped the floor. You think you can walk back in here, looking like that, and erase what I heard? What I saw? I grabbed her phone from the table, scrolling to a text from Richard. Meet me at the penthouse tonight. Wear that black lace. I need you. My voice dropped to a growl. You were planning to go, weren't you? Even after his wife found out. She flinched, tears welling up, but there was defiance in her eyes. Yes, okay. Yes. He makes me feel alive, Jake. You're always at the garage, covered in oil, too tired to even look at me. Richard sees me, really sees me. Her words sliced deep, a truth I couldn't argue. I'd let work take over, stopped noticing the way her hips swayed or how her laugh used to light up the room. But that didn't give her the right to trade me in. Get out, I said, turning away. She didn't move at first, and I felt her stare boring into my back. Then I heard her heels click toward the door, the sound fading as she left. I sank into the chair, head in my hands, the image of her in black lace burning behind my eyelids. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next day, I called in sick, my mind racing with a plan. I drove to her office, parked across the street, and watched. Sure enough, at lunch, she slipped out with Richard, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward him like she belonged there. They ducked into a sleek black car, and I followed, heart pounding. They pulled up to a high-rise downtown, and I saw her step out, that black lace peeking under her coat as she pressed herself against him. They disappeared inside, and I sat there, fists clenched, plotting. That's when my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Jake, it's Carla, Richard's wife. We need to talk. My breath caught. I'd never met her, but I'd heard Lydia mention her, cold, calculating, a woman who didn't mess around. I texted back, where? She replied with a coffee shop address, an hour later. I had nothing to lose. Carla was waiting, a striking woman in her 40s, blonde hair pulled tight, eyes like steel. She slid a folder across the table. Photos, she said, voice flat. Of your wife and my husband. I've got more videos, too. He thinks he's slick, but I've been watching. I opened it, and there they were, Lydia and Richard in a hotel room, her straddling him, his hands roaming her body. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. The heat in those images was undeniable, a betrayal burned into every frame. Why show me? I asked, my voice hoarse. Because I want him ruined, she said, leaning in. And you do, too. I've got a plan. Richard's company is fragile. One scandal, and it collapses. I'll leak this, but I need your help. You get Lydia to admit it on record, something we can use. In return, I'll make sure she loses everything, including him. I stared at her, the offer sinking in. Revenge. Cold, calculated, and oh so sweet. What's the catch? I asked. You don't interfere when I take him down, she said. And you keep your hands clean. Deal. Her smile was sharp, predatory. I nodded, a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in days, I felt in control. That night, I lured Lydia back. Told her I wanted to talk, to forgive. She showed up, hesitant, that red dress swapped for jeans and a tight top that still showed off her curves. We sat on the couch, the air thick with tension. I turned on the recorder app on my phone, hidden in my pocket. Tell me everything, I said, my voice soft, inviting. She hesitated, then spilled. How it started with flirty glances, escalated to late-night trysts, how Richard promised her the world. Her voice grew husky as she described his touch, his promises, and I fought to keep my face neutral, every word a dagger. But the twist came when she leaned in, her hand on my thigh. Jake, I miss you, she whispered, her lips close to mine. Maybe we can start over, forget him. Her breath was warm, her body pressing against me, and for a moment, I almost gave in. The old Jake would have. But then I saw Carla's folder in my mind, and I pulled back. Not yet, I said, my heart racing. She left, confused, and I saved the recording, a weapon in my hands. The next morning, I met Carla again, handed her the file, watched her smirk as she listened. Perfect, she said. Tomorrow, it all comes crashing down. But as I drove home, my phone buzzed, Lydia again. Richard's gone. He left me, said his wife, threatened him. Jake, I'm scared. I laughed, a bitter sound. She was reaping what she sowed. But the game was far from over. I sat in my truck, Lydia's text burning a hole in my phone. Richard's gone. He left me, said his wife, threatened him. Jake, I'm scared. Her words echoed in my head, a mix of triumph and something darker. Pity, maybe, or the ghost of the love I used to feel. I laughed again, that bitter edge cutting through the silence, but it didn't erase the image of her in my mind. Those curves in that tight top last night, her hand on my thigh, her lips so close I could taste the wine on her breath. She tried to pull me back, and damn if part of me didn't want to let her. I met Carla that afternoon at a dingy diner off Route 66, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tastes like regret. She slid into the booth, all business, her blonde hair sleek, her black dress clinging to her like a second skin. She had this air, confident, dangerous, the kind of woman who knows how to use what she's got. We've got him, she said, tapping a manicured nail on the table. Richard's scrambling. I leaked a hint of the photos to the board, anonymous tip. They're meeting tomorrow. His career's toast. I nodded, sipping the bitter coffee, my mind racing. And Lydia? I asked, my voice low. Carla's lips curled into a smirk. She's collateral damage. Once the scandal breaks, he'll cut her loose to save himself. She'll be left with nothing. Job, reputation, him. You wanted revenge, right? Her eyes locked on mine, and for a second, I felt a jolt, something electric, like she was testing me. I shifted in my seat, the heat of her gaze stirring memories of Lydia's touch. Yeah, I said, clearing my throat. But I want her to feel it. Every second of it. Carla leaned in, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. Oh, she will. But here's the twist. I've got more dirt. Richard's been playing her and another assistant, some redhead named Claire. Triangles get messy, Jake. I can use it to bury him deeper. You in? I nodded, my pulse quickening. The thought of Lydia betrayed, just like me, was a twisted kind of justice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I drove past Lydia's new place, a cheap apartment she'd rented after leaving. Her car was there, and I saw her through the window, pacing in a silk robe that barely covered her thighs. She was on the phone, frantic, and I wondered if it was Richard or Claire. The sight of her, vulnerable yet still so damn alluring, hit me hard. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting the urge to knock on her door, to confront her, to maybe even take her back into my arms. But then I remembered Carla's plan, and the fire of revenge won out. The next day, the scandal broke. News hit the local channels. CEO Richard Hale embroiled in an affair scandal, photos leaked, company stock plummeting. I watched from the garage, wrench in hand, as the story unfolded. Lydia called me, voice shaking. Jake, it's everywhere. They fired me. Richard won't answer. I'm ruined. I stayed silent, letting her words sink in, savoring the crack in her perfect facade. But the real twist came that afternoon. Carla showed up at my shop, unannounced, Her dress swapped for tight jeans and a leather jacket that hugged her frame. Phase 2, she said, handing me a USB drive. Videos. Richard and Claire, caught last night. He's still playing the field, even as his world burns. I plugged it into my laptop, and there they were, Claire, all fiery hair and bold moves, straddling Richard on a couch, her laughter mixing with his groans. It was raw, intimate, and it hit me like a punch. Lydia wasn't the only one he'd deceived. Use it, Carla said, her hand brushing my arm, lingering just long enough to send a shiver down my spine. Send it to Lydia. Let her see what he's really like. Her touch was deliberate, her eyes daring me to react. I pulled away, but the heat stayed, a confusing mix of anger and attraction. I nodded, uploading the video to a burner email and sending it to Lydia with no note. Minutes later, my phone rang, her number, but she didn't speak, just sobbed, a sound so broken it almost broke me. That night, she showed up at my door, mascara streaking her face, that silk robe swapped for a low-cut top and shorts that showed off her legs. Jake. I saw it, she choked out, stepping close, her body trembling. He used me. I was so stupid. Please, I need you. Her hand slid up my chest, her lips hovering near mine, and I felt that old pull, her warmth, her scent, the memory of nights when she'd whisper my name. But then I saw Richard's hands on Claire, and I stepped back. You think you can come crawling back? I said, my voice cold. After everything? She dropped to her knees, tears falling, begging. I'll do anything, Jake. Anything to make it right. The word anything hung heavy, laced with a promise that made my blood race, but I turned away. Leave, I said, and she did, her sobs echoing as she stumbled to her car. But the night wasn't over. My phone buzzed, a text from Carla. Good work. One more move. Meet me tomorrow. Bring the drive. I stared at the screen, then at the window where Lydia's taillights faded. The game was shifting, and I was in too deep. The next morning, I met Carla at a warehouse she'd rented, the air thick with tension. She handed me a contract, Richard's signature, a deal to sell company secrets to a rival. He's desperate, she said. This seals his fate. But there's a catch, he knows you're involved. He's coming for you. My heart stopped. Before I could process, the door burst open, Richard, wild-eyed, gun in hand. You ruined me, he roared, aiming at me. Carla stepped between us, calm as ever. Not yet, she said, and with a flick of her wrist, a hidden alarm triggered, cops swarming in. Richard dropped the gun, stunned, as they cuffed him. Carla turned to me, her smile wicked. Told you I'd handle it. But now, Jake, you're mine to protect. I stood there, adrenaline pumping, her words sinking in. Lydia was broken, Richard was done, and Carla, dangerous, alluring Carla, was pulling the strings. And me? I was caught in the fire, unsure if I'd burn or rise from the ashes. I stood in that warehouse, the echo of Richard's cuffs clicking shut still ringing in my ears, Carla's words burning into me. Now, Jake, you're mine to protect. Her voice was smooth, laced with a promise that sent a shiver down my spine. She stood there, leather jacket unzipped just enough to reveal a glimpse of cleavage, her hips cocked to one side, exuding a control that made my head spin. The cops hauled Richard away, his threats fading into the night, but my eyes were on her, dangerous, alluring, a woman who'd turned my revenge into her game. Protect me? I said, my voice rough, still reeling from the gun pointed at my chest. She stepped closer, the scent of her perfume spicy, intoxicating, wrapping around me like a trap. You've been my pawn, Jake, she murmured, her fingers grazing my arm, lingering on the muscle. But you played it well. Richard's done, Lydia's broken, and I've got what I wanted, his company, his secrets, his life. Now, I need someone loyal by my side. Her lips curved, a challenge in her eyes, and I felt that old heat, the kind Lydia used to ignite, stirring again, but darker, more complex. I pulled back, my mind a mess. I'm not your toy, I said, but the way she looked at me, hungry, calculating, made me question myself. She laughed, a low, throaty sound. We'll see. Meet me tomorrow. I've got a proposition. She handed me a card, her personal number, then walked out, her hips swaying, leaving me alone with the weight of what I'd done. That night, I couldn't shake her. Lydia's face flashed in my mind, those tears, that silk robe, her body pressed against me, begging for forgiveness. Then Richard's rage, Claire's laughter in that video, and now Carla's offer. I was drowning in them all. My phone buzzed. Lydia again. Jake, I lost everything. The kids hate me. Please, let me see them. Her voice broke, and I felt a pang, but it was buried under layers of hurt. I didn't reply. The next day, I met Carla at a penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. Her new office, she said, thanks to Richard's fall. The place screamed wealth, glass walls, a plush leather couch, a bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. She was in a slinky black dress, the fabric clinging to her curves, her hair loose and wild. Drink, she offered, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon, her movement slow, deliberate. I took it, the burn matching the fire in my gut. Proposition, I said, cutting to it. She sat close, her thigh brushing mine, her eyes locked on me. I need a partner, Jake. Someone to run this empire with me. You've got grit, and you've proven you can handle chaos. In return, I'll give you everything: money, power, a life beyond that garage. And maybe, she leaned in, her lips inches from mine, her breath warm. Something more personal. The air crackled, her offer dangling like a forbidden fruit, and I felt my resolve waver. Before I could answer, the door burst open. Lydia, wild-eyed, hair a mess, still in that low-cut top from the other night. Jake, don't, she cried, rushing in. She's using you. Carla's the one who set Richard up from the start. She wanted his company, not him. I found proof. She threw a USB drive on the table, her chest heaving, her desperation palpable. I stared, the room spinning. Carla's smirk didn't falter. Proof, Carla said, standing, her voice cool. Go ahead, play it. I plugged it in, and there it was, a recording of Carla, months ago, plotting with a rival exec. Richard's a fool, she'd said. I'll use his affairs to take him down, then step in. Lydia's the perfect pawn. Her husband's a nobody, easy to manipulate. My stomach dropped. Lydia hadn't just been Richard's toy, she'd been Carla's, too. And me? I was the fool who fell for it. Lydia, why didn't you tell me? I said, my voice raw. She sank to her knees, tears streaming. I was scared, Jake. I thought I could fix it, keep you, and the kids safe. But she's ruthless. She threatened me, said she'd ruin you if I didn't play along. Her hands reached for me, trembling, and I saw the woman I'd loved, flawed, broken, but real. Carla laughed, stepping back. Touching. But it's too late. The cops are on their way for her, not me. She broke into my office. Before I could react, sirens wailed outside. Lydia's face paled, and she grabbed my arm. Jake, please, help me. But Carla was already dialing, her smile cold. I looked at Lydia, her body close, her fear real, then at Carla, the mastermind who'd played us all. In that split second, I made my choice. I shoved the USB into my pocket, pulled Lydia up, and bolted for the fire escape. Run, I yelled, her hand in mine as we descended, her breath hot against my neck. We made it to my truck, tires screeching as I floored it. Lydia clung to me, sobbing, her body pressed against mine in the chaos. I'm sorry, Jake. I love you, she whispered, and for the first time, I believed her. But the twist came fast, my phone buzzed. Carla, you can't hide, Jake. I own the cops, too. Turn yourself in, or the kids pay. My heart stopped. She wasn't just ruthless, she was untouchable. I pulled over, Lydia's head on my shoulder, her tears soaking my shirt. What do we do? She asked, her voice small. I stared at the road, the city lights blurring. We fight, I said, my mind racing. I had the USB evidence to bring Carla down. But it meant risking everything, my freedom, my kids, my life with Lydia, if she'd have me. She looked up, her eyes searching mine, and leaned in, her lips brushing my cheek, a tentative, desperate kiss. The heat of it ignited something, but the cold reality of Carla's threat loomed larger. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer friend, handed over the USB, and went public with the story: Lydia's confession, Carla's scheme, Richard's fall. The media exploded, and Carla's empire began to crack. She vanished, but not before sending one last text. You'll regret this, Jake. Lydia and I faced the fallout together. Her charges dropped. My name cleared, but the kids were a mess, and trust was a fragile thread. We sat on the couch that night, her hand in mine, her body close but cautious. Can we try? She asked, her voice soft. I looked at her, those eyes, that smile, and nodded. Maybe, I said. But it's going to take time. The road ahead was uncertain, scarred by betrayal and fire, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Carla was out there, a shadow waiting to strike, but I'd face her. For my family. For myself.